We live in the world in the bird lottery. What does it mean? It means we cannot choose how our life is going to be look like, talking about unprivileged people and privileged people at the very first place. We see in current status quo right now, most likely families live in the world in unprivileged people that they still have to fulfill their basic needs and also still have to give enough budget, for example, to their children to fulfillment their school or needed at the very first place. Looking on how in status quo there's still lack of awareness of their family, because looking on how in the certain area, for example, that the children is not quite of their school because lack of awareness and responsibility of the parent in itself. Why it becomes problematic? Member of the house, the moment there are children who have enough performance in school but their family do not get additional benefit, we think it will worse because still there are people who live in unprivileged people, right? That is exactly it will help the family in unprivileged people at the very first place to fulfill their basic needs and also to enter their school, for example, at the very first place. Even if the family live on privileged people, for example, we think that's totally okay, right? Why so? Because it has become self-trigger of other family to support their children in terms of children performance, for example, in terms of supporting the motivation, for example, toward the education at the very first place. We think that it is better under our side of the house. If opposition claim that there are scholarship or so on and so forth, we think that it is not exclusive, right? Why so? Because under our side the scholarship is also exists, right? Because we think that exactly we give the additional or benefit in that is exclusive under our side of the house. That we think that even if there are scholarship, for example, we think that's totally limited in status quo. That is exactly the additional benefit will going to be look like that we explain in point of the mechanism. That is why our stand is so clear that we would pay additional benefit to family on welfare according to the child promoted in school in order to help the family and also increase the awareness of the family at the very first place. Our model is simple. Number one, we would like to pay additional benefit like scholarship toward the children for one semester, for example, or even scholarship for to entering the university, for example, like performance in school, like top 5 best performance in school, for example, also on so far. Second of all, we'll give incentive appreciation toward the family, like money, for example, to fulfill their family interest in terms of supporting their children at the very first place. Let's begin in my substantive. I have two substantive in my speech. Number one, what is the interest and responsibility of the family and why with this proposal I can achieve their interest at the very first place. Second of all, I'm going to tell you how the family will be look like, talking about the responsibility and awareness of the parent and also check and balance in status quo. So, let's begin in my first substantive. What is the interest and responsibility of the family? Number one, we do believe every family has the interest to achieve the greater good of the family in itself, right? Why so? Because the family in itself have the responsibility in terms of fulfillment, for example, their basic needs to give more, the budget, for example, to their children to continue their education at the very first place. Second of all, we do believe every family has the interest to make their children successful person, for example, without any difficulty in terms of enter the school, for example, or so on and so forth. Third of all, we do believe every family has the responsibility to educate, for example, or even to motivate their children to achieve their dream, to make the parent happy, for example, or so on and so forth. That is exactly it's the interest of and responsibility of the family or parent at the very first place. But look, guess what is wrong in status quo? Mr. and Madam Speaker, we do believe in our status quo right now that a lot of family still less of responsibility, still less of the awareness to educate their children, right? Why so? Because the family in itself still live in the world in certain people, for example, or certain area, for example, at the very first place. Why it happened? Under two reasons. Number one, lack of awareness in itself on how the education is something really important in status quo. Why so? Because the education in itself, people will help people, for example, can enter their job, for example, or even can enter the university at the very first place. But looking on how the family in status quo, that a lot of family still not care, for example, with their children, like the certain area the children quit their school because of lack awareness, or even in big area, for example, still quit our school because of lack of the awareness in itself. Second of all, we think that the lack awareness in itself is not becoming matter also anymore. Why so? Because second of all, is lack of budget of every individual in itself. Why so? Mr. and Madam Speaker, we think that there are people who live in underprivileged people, right? It shows to you the moment people live underprivileged people, they still have to fulfill their basic needs or even to give the additional pay, the additional, the OKT, for example, in university, for example, or even in school at the very first place. Why with this proposal important and also can achieve the family interest at the very first place? Under three reasons. Number one, it will help the people or family on unprivileged people, right? Why so? Because the one we give the additional benefit, we will help them in terms of fulfillment or basic needs and also give the scholarship, for example, or so on and so forth. Second of all, it will become self-trigger of family to educate, to other family to educate their children, right? Why so? Because the moment your family is get the additional benefit, the other family will, your family is get the additional benefit, that it is become the motivation for the other family in itself to support or even motivate their children to improve their education at the very first place, right? Second, third of all, it will increase the awareness to achieve their interest, because the moment other family get also, it will becoming self-trigger and also awareness to the family that will be going to be, self-evaluation, for example, toward the family and stuff. Therefore, this proposal will achieve their interest and also important toward the family at the very first place. And let's begin on my second substantive, how the parent will be look like, talking about the awareness and also check and balance in status quo. Look, guess what happened under outside the house? The moment we give the paid addiction benefit, exactly the family in itself can accessible educate their children. That will motivate, for example, the other family to support or even to support their children at the very first place. It is the first reason of under outside the house. The second reason is under outside the house will have the underprivileged people this engagement. Why so? Because we give the additional benefit in itself to fulfill, for example, their basic needs at the very first place, and also to fulfill the scholarship, for example, on how the children in itself is accessible, continue their education, to continue their school, for example, at the very first place. It's going to be look like under outside of the house at the very first place, right? And third reason is, even if there are scholarship, for example, in status quo, we think that is not totally okay, right? Why so? Because the scholarship in some is really the limited, for example, or so on and so forth. That is exactly the scholarship. It will help the underprivileged people, because we also give the additional benefit at the very first place, right? It shows you under outside the house is going to be look like in the end of the day. But comparatively, under the outside the house, the moment they are not pay additional benefit to the family welfare or so on and so forth, that is exactly in the outside the house that still there is underprivileged people, for example, that will have to support or motivate their children at the very first place. They still have to fulfill their children, for example, in terms of the school, in terms of education, in terms of the continue their education at the very first place. It shows to you in terms of the house is not going to be, there is no check and balancing, for example, because there is no pay addition benefit at the very first place. It's going to be look like under outside the house. We brought it to propose.